Hi, everyone. Kartik Krishnaiyer here for the Florida Squeeze. Wanted to address a few things around today's vote in Florida and then general conversation about what's going on in the state. So, let me first restate my history and my credentials in the quickest possible way I can. I've been involved in Florida Democratic Party politics since I was the president of the College Democrats at the University of Florida almost 30 years ago, and have been involved in every campaign cycle with Democratic candidates since, with the exception of 2010. I sat out that cycle. I was working as an executive in a soccer league. I've gone back to that from time to time, but have kept involved with Democratic politics. I've run statewide campaigns. I've worked with the party, etc. The 3 days we've seen this week of early voting are the worst 3 days I've seen of Democratic turnout relative to Republican turnout in the state since 2002, when we had a similar situation with mail-in votes, which gave the Republicans, Jeb Bush was the top ticket that year, right? And he was running for re-election as governor, gave them such a vote bank, a bank of votes, that there was nothing that could overcome it on election day, and he ended up winning by, I think, statewide by 13 points. None of the polls showed that. The polls showed a much tighter race between him and our nominee, which was Bill McBride. So that's why I'm very concerned about what I'm seeing in actual raw data. This isn't about vibes. This isn't about what my neighbor's brother's friend's daughter told them about Republicans who are turning out, potentially voting for Harris. This is about raw data and what we see. And I see there's been significant blowback online. Fernanda Mondi, who's a friend of mine who I respect tremendously, tweeted earlier today, basically saying Florida's a disaster, but here's the good news: Texas is in play. Texas may be in play, which I believe too. The Texas numbers you're seeing right now are incomplete. There's a lot of data delivery problems in Texas. What you're seeing publicly, I'm hearing positive things privately. I'm not saying the Democrats are going to win Texas. I'm not saying that at all, but I'm saying I think it's where we thought Florida would be. It's a 3 or 4 point state, which Florida appears not to be. Now, there was a lot of pushback against what I've been saying the last few days, saying, well, Democrats are going to vote on election day. And we addressed that yesterday in our video. That's very possible. But I find it very hard to get the sense that to comprehend both parties' voters, base voters, because what we've seen thus far in terms of turnout is largely super voters. It's about 75 to 80% of the voters, by my estimates, just poking through some of the voter data, are what we would call super voters. 2 out of the last 3, or 3 out of 3, the last general elections. That somehow we're going to have Democratic super voters that were voting by mail or voting early in 2020 and 2022. And that includes 2022, because, as I said, as much as Ron DeSantis won the state by in 2022, he didn't have 3 days, or the Republicans didn't have 3 days this good in early voting, as we've seen at this point. That all of a sudden we're going to have all the Democrats who were voting early in 20 and 22 show up on election day at the polls in their precincts, and then all the Republicans that were just waiting to make a run on the polls election day in 2020 and 2022, and actually in 2018 also, right? We saw this in 2018 as well, among Republicans. They now are all voting early and banking their votes early. Suddenly there's been this huge change in voter behavior, where Republicans are doing what Democrats used to do. Democrats are doing what Republicans used to do. It's possible, but I'm not sure it's that likely. Just being perfectly honest with you. So where are we? Because the vibes I keep hearing from people is good. The vibes are there's more enthusiasm around Kamala Harris than there was around Joe Biden 4 years ago among Democratic voters in Florida. Okay, I have to take people's words for that. I don't think there was a whole lot of enthusiasm for Biden. I'll admit that. So that's possible. I'm being told don't get fooled by the partisan numbers. There are tons of Republicans voting for Harris. I am going to tell you, even if you know well-informed Republicans who are voting for Harris, and you think, well, look at all the prominent Republicans that have endorsed Harris, starting with former Vice President Dick Cheney, right, and many, many, many others that have been quite prominent through the years. And we did a video last week, Bob Milligan, former statewide official here in this state, Republican, Jim Smith, who was a Democrat, became a Republican statewide official. They both have very, Smith released a statement, but Milligan did a press conference endorsing Harris. So, but that they do not represent Republican voters the way Republican voters think. So, if you think suddenly, because there's so many former elected officials that are Republicans endorsing Harris, that they're 10 or 15% of the Republicans in Florida are going to vote for Harris, I mean, it's possible. I'd say the number is probably more like 6 or 7%. And of the Democrats, maybe 3 or 4% are going to vote for Trump. So figure that out. That puts you in a position where, okay, then maybe what we have leaving today is 44 to 36. It's basically a 7.5 point, close to an 8 point Republican lead by my estimates. If you account for some of those Republicans voting for Harris, okay, it's 43-37. Still losing by 6 points. Maybe you throw in NPAs, and maybe Harris is getting I'm guessing right now about 18% of the vote in the state that's in is NPA. Let's say 10% of that is going to Harris and 8% is going to Trump, because that's logical. You're not going to get 70% of the NPA vote. I heard this in 2020, by the way, even an hour before the polls closed, from people in the Biden campaign, that we were going to get 60% of the NPA vote in Florida. We got 52%. So let's just even account for 10 to 8. Let's go that ratio. Then you've got Harris at 47 and you've got Trump at 53 right now, when we know most Republicans haven't voted in the state. So it's not to say that this is over. It's to say Democrats need to vote. And I think a lot of them need to bank their votes early. Don't want to get too in the weeds. Obviously, those of you who read the Florida Squeeze know that we follow tropical weather closely. We could have tropical weather late next week. That could disrupt voting. And truthfully, we have seen this time and again in this state, when tropical weather affects voting, it affects Democrats more than Republicans. We talked about 2004, what happened on this site and on this channel before. We've talked about what happened in 2018 after Michael. We've talked about what happened in 2022 after Ian, right? These are all Republican successes. There are people still find a way to vote. Democrats don't necessarily. So the vibe is still very good, I understand. People are still saying there's a lot of energy, momentum, people who are behind Harris, people who are behind Mukersel Powell, motivated by the abortion issue. I get that. And I've also talked about in the past, ballot initiatives don't necessarily drive Democratic performance. They do drive turnout, but more people who turn out for ballot initiatives that are kind of liberal ballot initiatives vote Republican than you might think. The marijuana initiative in 2014, the medical marijuana initiative, that didn't help us. I have to admit, I was running a statewide Democratic campaign that year. We were counting on that. It didn't help us. Yeah, it seemed to turn out more votes for the Libertarian than anything. We had a spike in Libertarian votes for both governor and attorney general. Attorney general was my race, by the way. So, look, I mean, I want to be optimistic. I think we need to drive turnout. We need to keep that enthusiasm up if we're Democrats. But honestly, like you can't lie, you can't fudge data. This is where I've gotten a lot of criticism through the years. And others like me, we've reported data. We know the situation in the state. We know how bad it's getting for Democrats. But anything we report, which is based on real numbers, raw numbers, accurate numbers, voter turnout, voter registration, gets pushed back. There's always a caveat. There's always a qualifier. Well, you're not thinking about this. You're not thinking about that. And then in the end, we end up losing those elections. And then we spend the next 2 months spinning and making excuses. You know, the cycle is a vicious cycle. So the point is, there's 13 days left. If you're a Democrat and you believe the vibes are good, or you're a Harris supporting NPA or Republican, or Mukherjee Powell supporting Republican or NPA, concerned about the abortion issue, concerned about the environment, concerned about climate change, then let's go. Because we're in an awful hole right now in Florida.